Oklahoma Republicans are now pushing legislation that would allow Christian doctors to just refuse to help patients for any reason, as long as the justification is it violates my religious beliefs. That's it. And it would think about what that means. Doctors who use that excuse could refuse to do blood transfusions. They could refuse to provide STI testing, provide gender-affirming care, give vaccinations, prescribe birth control, propose mental health care. Anything that their religion tells them is wrong or forbidden, or you should just pray about it so you don't need my help, doctors could get out of doing those things if this bill were to pass. And we talked a lot about Catholic hospitals and their limitations. There are some procedures that Catholic hospitals will not do because they say it violates Catholic doctrine. And that's a problem because Catholic hospitals are taking over the country. Well, this bill would allow any medical professional to refuse any procedure that violates their ethical, moral, or religious beliefs and principles. This is what the bill actually says in this relevant part. And it says a new section of the law would read as follows. A medical practitioner has a right not to participate in a healthcare service that violates the medical practitioner's conscience. A healthcare institution may not be held liable for the exercise of conscience not to participate in a healthcare service by a medical practitioner employed, contracted, or granted admitting privileges by the institution. So the doctor doesn't have to do it. The hospital cannot be sued for it. Let's just have a free-for-all when it comes to healthcare. And so this is House Bill 1224. It's sponsored by a Republican named Kevin West. And earlier this week, that bill passed in the House Health and Human Services Oversight Committee on a 7-6 vote. And so that means it's going to be heard by the full House in Oklahoma. And by the way, the 7-6 vote is kind of weird because that means like 3 Democrats are on that committee. They all voted against it. But even 3 Republicans were like, this sounds bad. And they voted against it too. And the news outlet, the Oklahoma Voice, or just Oklahoma Voice, they posted about this bill, and this is what they said. The legislation, which West has said has been successful in a handful of states, could allow a physician or an entire hospital to choose not to offer procedures that conflict with personal beliefs. This excludes emergency care. So that's great. If it's an emergency, they still got to do it. Although the bill does not define the parameters that create that situation. So it says you don't have to do, you have to do the procedure if it's an emergency. Oh, what counts as an emergency? We don't know. No specific procedures or types of care are outlined in the bill, meaning a healthcare provider, institution, or payer could choose to stop offering STD testing, blood transfusions, or elective procedures. They don't have to do anything if they say it goes against their religion. So that's disturbing. There is the Democratic House Minority Leader, Cindy Munson, who spoke out against this bill. Because again, they don't have the votes to stop it, but they exist. They can throw gum in the works. They can speak out against it. And this is what the House Democratic Minority Leader said in Oklahoma. We just had a conversation last week about the lack of maternal or the amount of maternal health care deserts in the state. And we know that most of what we're talking about here is abortion, gender-affirming care, those types of procedures and services. And so where will Oklahomans go? Even if it's just a handful of people who need care, if there's truly no access. If people decide to take this law and say, I'm not going to provide a procedure or service because it goes against my conscience, where will Oklahomans go? And that's a fair point, because if you're a woman and you need certain types of health care, and the only people in your rural community in Oklahoma are doctors who say, well, you shouldn't have had sex, so I'm not going to test you for anything involving that, pregnancy, STIs, whatever, because it goes against my religion. What do you want her to do? If the Hippocratic Oath says do no harm, and the Republican Party says do as much harm as possible as long as we're hurting the people we hate, Republicans are saying we come first, not your ethical priorities. The guy who's sponsoring this, Kevin West, he said this bill was successful in other states. He didn't offer any evidence to back that up, which is worth pointing out. But I think a bigger part of this is the vagueness. Because we know there are conservative doctors and right-wing hospitals that would rather place women at risk of death than providing safe abortions, even if they're not Catholic hospitals. And this bill would create conditions that allow right-wing doctors to limit their services based on personal delusions rather than doing what's in the best interest of patients. And this bill says they would not get in trouble for it. They cannot be held liable for damages. So if a patient dies because a doctor said, I don't want to help you because Jesus, that physician will not suffer any professional consequences for it. And that could be a problem in Oklahoma, which is largely rural, where they don't have a choice of doctors. If one doctor says, I refuse to help you because I'm a Christian, you cannot just drive 2 minutes to the next hospital and get help there. This is the problem with abortion restrictions, too. A lot of women may not be able to get an abortion in a certain part of a state or a certain state, so they have to cross state lines. But now we're talking a lot of money and time. They got to drive several hours to get to another state. They got to spend money on a hotel room and gas, and they have to take time off of work. And that is time and money they may not have because the doctors in their state or the politicians in their state are so selfish and so religious that they refuse to do the right thing, right? So keep in mind, who's clamoring for this bill? Are doctors asking Republicans to pass this bill? No. West said he did not speak to healthcare providers before he filed this bill. Just like Republicans who push for Bibles in schools, they never talk to teachers beforehand. Like, why bother talking to people when you know the people who are going to be affected by your legislation don't want it? Right? Nothing Republicans love more than forcing other people to adopting their beliefs because they are unable to persuade anyone to adopt those beliefs. I guess the only consolation right now is that bills like this have been proposed before in Oklahoma, and they have been rejected in Oklahoma. Even now, this bill that we are talking about, the state, they tried this a year ago, and the state Senate rejected it. And when this bill was in front of the state Senate subcommittee earlier this week, the subcommittee rejected it. But because it passed in a House subcommittee, the full House will get to debate it and vote on it. And if they pass it, it's going to go to the Senate anyway. So there will be votes on this. So, I mean, I guess, yay, that some Oklahoma Republicans decided this is a bad idea, but they're not speaking for the full Senate, the full legislature. So we will see what happens with this. Kevin West, by the way, has a history of extremism. If you Google him, a few years ago, he actually agreed with a fellow extremist lawmaker that Black Lives Matter activists are just like members of the KKK. That's what one of his colleagues said. And then Kevin West is like, yep, I agree. Something like that. So that's who we're talking about. This guy who's the champion of Jesus. All right, I'll stop there. What questions we got here? Wouldn't that violate their medical oath? Yup, but it's not the Bible, so they don't care. That's how it works. I stepped away for a second, so sorry if I'm repeating something, but could patients converge on a few progressive providers known by informal networks? I mean, in theory, yes, but having a list of the providers who will help you is a dangerous practice because it's putting the people on that list in danger. If the state passes a law that puts these people in danger too, if the state says abortion is banned and there's a secret list of doctors who will help you anyway, those doctors could go to jail. Now, it wouldn't affect this particular bill, which says doctors are allowed to say no, but they don't have to say no if they don't want to, whatever. But like what you're suggesting is what has happened in a lot of places. So yeah, that is what would happen. But also, again, keep in mind, it's Oklahoma. You have to drive a long way if you live in a rural area to get to a place where there might be those doctors who are willing to help you. And that's the rough part. They could refuse care to a Black person or a gay person. They could refuse to provide services to a Democrat or an immigrant. I mean, yeah, based on the reasoning they use, there are churches that still oppose interracial marriage. And they will say, because there's always a local news story every time it happens, they will say, well, God doesn't want the races to mix. And they'll be like, Noah's son Ham has a curse or whatever. Those people do exist. And you can imagine that if some doctor says it's against my religion to touch another woman if I'm a male doctor, or I don't believe, I believe you're a Democrat, I believe you're satanic, and so I don't want to help you with anything. Like, they can make up whatever excuses they want and not face any punishment for it. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the fact that Republicans want to create a situation where that could happen should be disturbing to everyone. How fast that rule would be repealed if doctors started to deny service to Republicans. Maybe that's the way to do it. Maybe you get good doctors to say, all right, if you're passing this bill, my conscience says I'm not going to help people who make others suffer. The problem with that is the progressive doctors who could do such a thing are all generally nice people who would never do such a thing. That's why they're nice progressive Democrats. So nice in theory, but it's not going to happen. Okay, request. We need to make a drinking rule for every time Hemant brings up Oklahoma. Speak for several of us here. You're not the only one, and we're all going to be drunk.